Hey, Rachel.
Hello, how are you, Kara?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I've been enjoying the rainy weather. It's been
Yeah.
fantastic.
Are you from Montana?
I am. I'm from Fort Benton.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah.
I'm from Oregon, so I woke up this morning and it was just like, oh, it feels just like Oregon. Just like home right now.
Yeah, it's a nice little change from the dust.
Yeah. Fort Benton is like kind of by Great Falls.
Yeah,
Or
it's northeast of Great Falls, about half an hour.
okay.
It's really cute. It's nice to visit, not so much to live when you're a teenager.
How close is it to like Shoto or Augusta?
Oh, it's on the opposite side of Great Falls.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So it's a little browner and about the same amount of wind.
Okay.
Good afternoon. How's everybody?
Pretty good,
How are
yeah.
you?
Weird spring weather like just throws me off a little bit.
Can you guys see the agenda right now?
You can, yes.
Okay, perfect. I've been struggling with the screen sharing options.
Hi, Kara.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, yeah. Byron did, I talked to him on Monday and he said he will not be able to make today's meeting. He's had a couple things come up. So I think we're just waiting for John and just John.
Want to ping him, Kara, just send him a reminder and we can get started.
Sure, yeah, let me send him an email real quick.
He's probably running from one thing to the next, so. Did he say? Who's available? Okay, ready, Karen?
Yep, and I just emailed John.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks. We'll call the meeting to order. Let's just do a quick roll call and introduction. Let's go around. Rachel, do you want to can start with you?
Weber, I work over at Mosaic Architecture as one of their designers. I'm a Montana native, and that's pretty much all we need to talk about today.
All right. Good to have you here today. Hey, Chris.
Hi, yeah, I'm Chris Hunter. I'm a retired fisheries biologist, and I'm the chairman of the United Way Board. Lived in Helena since, well, 40 some years.
Excellent. Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie Bull, commercial lender at Opportunity Bank.
Okay, Riley.
And I'm Riley Hanson, architect with Slate Architects. I'm born and raised Helena native, spent a stint over in Portland, Oregon, which included apartment property management positions. So
Very good. Excellent. And is that everyone today? Anyone else? No, I think that's everyone. Again, I'm Michael O'Neill. I'm executive director of the Helena Housing Authority. Been living in Helena just for 30 years, and glad to be a part of this exciting initiative here. So we'll get started. We didn't have minutes, did we, Karen?
No, and I was, if I, maybe you could just have a minute. So I took notes from the first meeting that we had, and I just wanted to, I guess, let you guys know, hopefully between myself and April Sparks, our administrative assistant, we'll be able to start putting out some more kind of formal minutes. And so the city's been doing a lot of work in the past year or so to kind of streamline a lot of our boards, including the city commission. And they really want to format all of our agendas and meeting minutes and all of the material associated with any boards on what they do for the city commission meetings. And so I just got to look at some of those minutes, and they're very different than what I had put together for our last meeting. And so I'm going to give that a shot after this meeting to really put together something that replicates that format. And then hopefully the next meeting we'll have something more along those lines to be able to look at and approve. And I think also they'll be available online or I'm also happy to share recordings or notes with you if you'd like that as well.
All right, sounds good, Karen. Sounds a good idea. Consistent. All right. Next is the meat of our agenda today. If we're still referring back to our guidelines, and really at the heart of the guidelines is how we would allow money to be spent. And so the fundamental question there is eligible activities. And so wanted to have a good, thorough conversation with the advisory board to make sure that we're presenting to the city commission what we think, really taking a long look at the guidelines that's presented currently, and then talk about if we want to revise them in any fashion. I have expressed a concern that it's my belief that it's best at this stage of having guidelines to support affordable housing activities that we we provide an opportunity for a variety of affordable housing activities that are consistent with what we see in terms of what's been done not only locally, but also across the state as successful ways of addressing affordable housing needs. And keep in mind that the activities that end up being approved in each case will be approved by the city commission. So you don't necessarily have to prioritize one versus the other. It really will be driven by the projects that come forward. And so I ask that we go through some of these things, in that some of these additional activities were added, but I just wanted to just point out that there's some key activities that typically would be eligible when you're looking at affordable housing activities that as currently written in the guidelines would not necessarily be something that would be funded through this housing trust fund. And so I wanted to make sure the advisory board was aware of that, and that we were all right having a shorter list, or if we should take some steps to review and perhaps add things back in, so that we'd create a maximum flexibility in terms of the types of projects that could come forward. And so when you look at the array of eligible activities under affordable housing programs, you can look at kind of probably a good program to look at is the federal state funded home program, which kind of funds a whole broad array of affordable housing activities. And so they essentially break things down into a variety of, usually things get broken down under home ownership, rental, and sometimes under kind of special purpose housing, which can sometimes be a catch-all for things like congregate living, like group homes, transitional living housing, and it's depending on the program, whether or not the housing program funds an emergency shelter or not. And a lot of housing programs that's considered a community facility. But a few things jumped out at me as being missing, and I think would be something we might regret not having, at least making. And again, these are just creating opportunities for future partners, community partners, come forward with a project, large or small, and have access to the Housing Trust Fund as part of trying to encourage a certain activity. So under home ownership, the first one is first-time homebuyer down payment assistance. I think folks may be familiar with that, and we're not talking about the city directly administering this program to home buyers. Would involve a third party, some entity that's part of what they do already. It's not something you want to just do, and you want to have the capacity to manage a program like that. And so what this does is that it can be matched. The down payment assistance helps buy down the cost of buying the home. And so there are some existing programs where you can get upwards to, even as high as $40,000 to down payment assistance, which sounds like a lot of money. And historically, down payment assistance is probably the biggest activity that assisting people to become homeowners in the first place. Far exceeds any direct development of housing as a way of getting people to home ownership. And when you look around the country, in many high cost areas, and we certainly are moving into being a high cost area, that you'll see programs that are both subsidizing the construction and then are also subsidizing the purchase, and they do that through down payment assistance. And they can structure the down payment assistance in a variety of ways. It can be an amortizing loan, or it can be a loan that's subject to some sort of recapture restriction. And sometimes what can be very effective is a recapture that involves an equity share. So that, and the reason why it might be important, even though almost every one of, I think every one of the housing activities we're talking about, including funding out of the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board or advisor out of the Housing Trust Fund, has other sources of funds that can fund those activities. But what we're trying to do with the city's funds is leverage and extend what is possible. And so in my mind, having home buyer down payment assistance, because it is historically the most successful way of getting people into home ownership in the state of Montana, that we should encourage that. There are, locally, there's a down payment assistance program and down payment loan program through NeighborWorks Montana that's available. But those criteria in terms of the size of the loan and the size of the down payment assistance available is based on statewide rather than, and that we could extend the purchase power of local folks if we think that's needed through, if say someone was coming forward with a, to want to do additional first-time home buyer, say a $5,000 down payment assistance in some fashion using, accessing the City of Helena Housing Trust Fund activity. But if we could just talk about a little bit about down payment assistance and what folks think of that as an activity. Right now, in terms of home ownership, what we have is the development of either purchasing, and renovating or developing property for home ownership. So we're not necessarily subsidizing the development of it rather than, but currently we don't have subsidizing the purchase.
So was this discussed when the guidelines were first developed?
What's that?
I said, was this discussed when these guidelines were first developed?
Well, I think a lot of these things were discussed in what we were, I'm not quite certain of how the final cut was made on some of these activities. And I think in terms of what I explained to Kara was that I think it's important that, in the end, we're, as an advisory board, we're putting our, we're saying this is what we think is best for Helena. And so in my mind, not having home buyer down payment assistance would be a big, it's one of the most successful tools for promoting home ownership. And it's kind of, for me, to be a glaring tool not to have in our toolkit locally.
I'm just curious why it wasn't included in the first place.
I can
Well-
maybe speak to that if Michael, if that's
Sure,
okay.
sure.
Or
Yeah.
so when the commission initially passed the resolution that created the trust fund, there's and maybe it's on our website, but I'm going to actually send that out to you guys so you can just take a look at what that what all that covers. But it really is pretty expansive, and it really does allow this fund to be used for all of these items, in addition to, like, I think it would even cover like educational programs, so like consumer programs, like I think Rocky does a first-time home buyer course or something like that. And I think it got pared down. So, and we covered a little bit of this, maybe our very first meeting, but we've done some feedback sessions with partners or housing stakeholders in the community. And we also put what the addition of these guidelines in the application that you guys have access to was actually up for public comment as well. And I think our previous, just recently retired development director, Sharon Haugen, also between her and I think maybe some of the other management, so the city manager and maybe some of the commissioners also had some say in having those activities pared down and wanting this fund really to be used is gap financing, and feeling that those activities that are on there currently maybe exemplified gap financing best, or maybe have the highest impact, is maybe how that, I think what the feeling there was. And so again, I just want to reiterate that in our resolution, all of these activities are allowable. And again, I think, I know, Michael, you had some pretty strong feelings as far as that maybe things are easier to take away than to add. And so maybe wanting to start off with as much as possible rather than a limited kind of array of activities. But I don't know if that answers the question, Chris, or if that it definitely went through a lot of eyes to get to where it was.
Right. And that's why I asked the question, was why it wasn't included in previously.
Chris, over the, we've been bouncing around with these things for quite a while now, and it just, I may miss a meeting from time to time, but not really, pretty rarely. And so it was, and looking at it for this step in terms of giving our, recommendation, some of these things just that they're not in the current guidelines seems to me to be again, something that I think should be in there. And again, none of these activities are necessarily going to occur unless a capable organization comes forward with an effective plan to deliver it, and to have that plan and the funding be approved by the city commission. But if at this stage we leave certain activities like home buyer assistance off the table, we're saying, that we won't be inviting that type of activity at this stage. And that my experience is that it's best to leave things as open, and particularly in terms of not adding things that are kind of out of the ordinary, but things that are types of tools that are used regularly in the affordable housing arena, that we should probably have that be clearly, an option locally here to use these funds, and it's kind of fitting with the same goals that we're talking about gap financing. It's kind of the last money in rather than first. And so whether home buyer down payment assistance is something we want to go forward with and I don't know, some of the lenders may, talk about, some of the kind of the first time home buyer marketplace has kind of gotten, certainly because of pricing, has gotten much more challenging, and just the amount of first time home buyer activity particularly has become lower because of we necessarily haven't been able to keep up using some of the other funding streams to close the gap between, we've just seen such a jump in home ownership. And so whether or not, Stephanie, I don't know if you've done anything in your career on the residential side, mortgage side.
I like to say I do everything but mortgages because they're too hard, too complicated. No, but if we could just answer this question, how do the first time home buyer down payment assistance, how would that money get repaid to the housing trust fund?
Again, I think the detail of that would come forward in any project. And so, but typically these things can be structured as an amortizing, very low interest loan, or commonly they're done as a due on sale type of activity. And frequently, I ran a statewide project promoting home ownership for people with disabilities. We did about 150 home purchases, home buyers with disabilities, and we used down payment assistance due on sale with an equity share. And so what that does is that it preserves the the value of the money over time in relation to the housing market. So at the time of purchase, you establish a percentage of what percentage of the down payment assistance that you're providing assisted the original purchase, and that certain things are not included, but generally what the appraised value or what the sales price is. You have an equity share, that increase in value between the original purchase price and the later price, sales price. You share, not only you pay back the original down payment amount, but that you pay back a share of that thing. So there's 3 or 4 common mechanisms of capturing down payment assistance. Some are
So is
more.
there thought that you would take a piece of this and say like a percentage of this money could be available for a third party to come in and request that as, or it says, I mean, in eligible uses, it says acquisition of real property and improvements. Is that not specific enough? That's kind of what
In the way that's,
we add.
yeah, I think that's probably more targeted at, I mean, whether that's more targeted at not necessarily on the home buyer side, but in terms of purchasing some building for the purposes of converting either the existing housing or converting it to housing. I don't know if that's, when we get into the more detail of the guideline, we're talking more about the development of housing. And so making clear, since we get into that kind of detail, it's making clear that home buyer down payment assistance would be an eligible activity. And again, none of these things are we necessarily saying will be done. What we're saying is, should we say these type of activities could be done? And in terms of whatever would be set aside for that activity would be a decision of the city commission for a particular proposal. Some of this could be done, it just, and whether or not it would make sense for folks to do it or not, or if there'd be interest in an organization adding on this to have, sometimes doing a home purchase, particularly in these costly times, you kind of do a brick by brick. And so you might use home fund down payment assistance. Many of you might be familiar with Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program. For member banks of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines, you can apply for down payment assistance. Kind of that's a match. And then what I would just imagine is that to give a little more buying power in Helena, there may be an interest in adding a piece of this housing trust fund dollars to just the toolbox that we're having. Or if we feel that's not needed, or we just muddies the water, we can, I just wanted to draw it to your attention and see what we thought as a board.
I wholeheartedly agree in being able to have some of our funds available for first-time home buyer down payment assistance. I think that's incredibly important with many families being priced out of the market nowadays, and mostly that's due to, of course, the lack of initial funds. I mean, I wouldn't have my house if it weren't for the first-time home buyer assistance myself. My biggest curiosity is, I guess, how do we, I guess, make these funds known to the folks that need them most? Obviously, with a bunch of our other funding programs, they'll be aimed at developers that kind of know where to look for this type of funding assistance. But for first-time home buyers, I mean, I know I myself was blind as a bat going into the real estate market. So I guess I'm just curious how we would effectively be able to advertise this type of assistance to those who need it.
So generally on things like, for all these activities, it really will be kind of, there's entities that are involved in affordable housing in terms of the down payment assistance, again, it wouldn't be thought that it would be directly to the homeowner, that the funds would be administered by a third party
Mhm.
nonprofit organization that has experience in that and capacity to do it. And that they primarily get the word out through conferences, working directly with lenders and realtors. Kara talked about the home buyer education program that's gone on at RMDC. That's part of a statewide network, home buyer educator network through AbeWorks Montana. And they, as part of that, they go over, and Riley, you may have even attended those courses.
I did indeed.
Yeah, so they go over things, the variety of different tools that are out there. And so I would imagine the word would get out here. Again, what we're talking about here is that out of this fund that is to provide a little additional boost to activity, affordable housing activity in Helena, whether or not we include down payment assistance as a possible tool or not at this stage.
So if I'm reading this correctly, a private individual wouldn't be an eligible applicant anyway.
Right.
So lending institution would have to apply for the funds, and then they would disperse them to the first time home buyers.
Well, it'd be a third party that does home buyer assistance loans who would be the intermediary with the lending. Usually these loans come in, they're the last in line. So that, the first mortgages has first lien rights and things like that. But ready. So we can, let's go through a variety of different options. On a similar basis, the homeowner rehab loan program might be, again, not something necessarily anyone's going to do, but it's commonly part of the tool chest that you would see in affordable housing. Right now, we have a partnership the city does to provide homeowner rehab assistance through a CDBG grant. It has certain eligibility, and so that's just getting underway. And this would just be another, again, in line with the other types of activities. This would be a way of boosting or supplementing rehab loans that are the rehab program that the city is already kicking off through the use of CDBG. Not everyone would necessarily qualify for the CDBG, or that whether or not there might be some other purpose where this would make sense. Often homeowner rehab loans have a focus on kind of life and safety issues, and it's particularly important to have it related to an aging population like we have now, where people can make kind of accessibility improvements and safety improvements in their home. And again, this would be for an individual homeowner, but it would be through a third party entity that would be administering the thing. It could be with or without being paired with some other funding source like the CDBG homeowner rehab program going on, or even a private lender loan. But again, we don't know what the activity would look like. It was just, we're saying, do we want to allow that type of activity as a potential project coming forward?
My curiosity in regards to, I suppose, the rehab loans is this geared towards, I suppose, people who have owned their home for so many years, and it is now, of course, failing and or derelict, or is this geared more towards? Well, I guess my concern is, how do we be able to prevent somebody, say, coming in, buying a cheap house and using these funds to flip it and try to sell it at a profit? I don't think that that's what this program is for. And I guess I'm just concerned that might be abusable unless we're careful with how we, I guess, frame the requirements for such a loan.
Yeah, you will often see structuring of these programs with payback periods that are, the longer you hold the property, the less you pay back. So there's an incentive that it's not for the purpose, it's to maintain people being able to stay in their home. And the life and safety things, often the things that you'll see in addition to physical accessibility, you'll see, true life and safety things, systems, things where the roofs are failing, heating systems are failing, hot water heaters, variety of, just things could, endanger a homeowner. And again, these funds are, if there was such a program coming forward for these funds, it'd be the expectation of any well-designed program would be that these funds would be the last things in. So like on some of these examples depending on the income of the homeowner, they would first be looking at like the weatherization program that's available locally through HRDC for RMDC you'd be looking to them for the funding for a furnace or a hot water heater. There may be, we currently have the CDBG home rehab program. We'd be looking for that. Do they qualify for that? And that this again would be funding that would come in at the end. Living in the city, we have fewer options that we kind of got. We won't go deep into it, but if we could just change 1-2 words in a statute, we would be qualified to have USDA rural development loans in the city of Helena. Other Montana cities can that are bigger than Helena, and it's just the way it was written that so out in the county, you can access USDA rural development loans, and a big use of that around the state is for rehab. And so again, this would just be another tool in the toolkit.
Since
And then the third item, I wouldn't necessarily limit it to resident-owned manufactured housing, but manufactured housing is a fairly common preferred way for some folks to have affordable homes, and particularly homes that they feel has more control on versus rentals. And we haven't seen a lot of this yet in Helena, but where you see what frequently happens is that a developer comes in, particularly in a rapidly rising market like we have in Helena, and they come in and buy up a manufactured housing park. And those of you familiar with manufactured housing of a certain age and stuff, you really can't move your home. If it's newer and such, you might be able to, but a lot of folks, they've been living there for a long, long time. And so it can really be disruptive that we have a number of manufactured housing parks in the city of Helena that could be subject to this kind of thing. And there's one type of tool that we've been seeing happen around the state is the resident-owned community, where it's usually a willing seller of the manufactured housing park. They may have, it's often a mom and pop operation that's running these things, and they've had their whole career. They feel pretty proud of the fact that they've been able to provide a decent place for people to live and run a community, and that they are interested in maybe preserving that as a place where people can park their manufactured home. And in a resident-owned community, the residents end up owning the community as a co-op. The residents own their own manufactured home, but the community itself and all the infrastructure is owned cooperatively. But again, that's just one activity. One thing under the manufactured housing is whether or not we generally don't have manufactured housing except more like modular housing, and that's developed in the city limits. There's a lot of kind of some limitations on it that outside of parks, but usually that manufactured housing can be considered part of it. It's a home ownership type of home ownership. It just, I think something like 18% of Montanans live in manufactured housing. So it is a fairly common option for affordable home ownership in terms of things. But this would be looking at things like preserving of an existing park at the risk of it being sold and displacing, could be 60 residents, 60 households, or that what you often see in these communities is that their infrastructure fails. And so a way of preserving it, and again, you would have strict limits on and recapture, that you couldn't turn around, use these funds, and then sell out the property without repaying or otherwise preserving it. But it certainly is something that most of the major cities have seen happen, and I'm sure at some point it's going to happen here in Helena. But it would, rather than trying to deal with it as an emergency, it often these type deals usually come forward as a way done over a period of time, allows all parties to be comfortable with it. Sometimes they put these communities up for bid and they accept packages, and it often takes a willing seller who really wants to kind of support the mission of continuing to provide an affordable housing choice in the community, because otherwise, you think of different places where we have manufactured housing communities around Helena. You could come in and you pretty much can move the manufactured housing and have a much more valuable piece of property for development of a variety of types. And I can think of countless examples in Bozeman, Missoula, Billings, Kalispell area. Bitterroot's seen a lot of these type of properties go away.
So Michael, with the people, the owners of the manufactured housing would have to form an organization and apply for the funding. Is that how that would work?
Yeah, they receive assistance in kind of forming. They usually form a nonprofit, or they could form a co-op. And when it comes to a resident-owned community, that's the way it would work. If in other manufactured housing community, if it's a private ownership, again, it would come in and see if there's, they would be following, what would be commonly underwritten financing. And again, these funds, if it would be asked for, would be limited to gap financing, I would imagine. And say if a manufactured park owner wanted to come in and seek assistance on an infrastructure need or something, that you would have a restriction, a need restriction. So any sale of the property would trigger the immediate repayment of the loan and things like that. But I think the resident-owned community, what you can kind of Google it, see examples of it, not only in Montana but around the country. They call it ROC activity, resident-owned community, manufactured housing community. But it's particularly in rural states, it's a growing activity, and I think it's a good tool.
Interesting.
But other activities, whether or not we feel that they're as it's really how we read it. So Stephanie makes, we do say things like the acquisition of real property and improvements. We don't allow, so the question of the purchase of land to facilitate a specific affordable housing work, whether or not do we feel that's probably included in here already, but whether or not we need to spell that out. What's real clear is that we're not talking about land banking, which is the purchasing of land for the purpose of using it as some debate with some non-specific project. And so that's clearly ineligible. But certainly it's a relatively safe use. Sometimes the purchase of land is what makes a project go. And sometimes they can be part of one whole package, but sometimes the purchase of the land has to occur before you put all the other pieces together. And so, again, you don't want to be in the business of land banking, but for activity that has a specific, I wouldn't think we'd want the city to be encouraging anything but purchase of land with a specific purpose in mind for affordable housing. Whether or not we need to spell that out, if people want to read carefully the way we currently have our eligible uses and see if there's anything further we want to bring forward, and then but these are areas that I thought was important that we have some thoughts on and discussion. And
Michael, I have a question on the first two. So would a third party, whoever it is, come in and apply for a couple $100,000 of this money, and then they would, and if it was approved, they would hang on to that money and wait for individuals to come in and apply for it? Is that how that would work?
I think in this type of activity, I don't think it makes sense for a third party to hold on to the money in that way. That it would just be, they would come forward with a proposal and kind of, it would be more like a set aside for a certain amount of time within the fund. And that if it was approved, it's kind of, we're saying that they're coming in and saying, and so I would think the money would be drawn down rather than in one big lump sum, that they would arrange for the activity and they'd pull down the money when they had a deal. You could structure it. I mean, I think a lot of our activities, the way this is going to play out, can happen in two basic ways. Sometimes it happens kind of on the macro level, and we'll want to use these funds to support some large activities that maybe, lots of units. And in other ways, we can facilitate affordable home ownership in small ways, and one at a time, but they all add up. That they, and so putting out the money. I don't think it makes sense for an entity to be holding the money. And so,
no, I would be worried about that money then not being available for something else that comes along that we really like.
So you would have, you would probably have some boundary around it and saying, they'd come in and say, we would like to set aside, ask for a set aside so much of this activity per year or something. And then at each year that you would, if it hasn't been used, it can be released or something. Again, the specifics of it would be something that an entity would have to come up with, and it would have to make sense to, these type of things will come to this board for our review, but then in the end, the city commission will make a final decision on any particular project.
Okay, thank you.
So it sounds like, just so I understand it correctly, I mean, effectively, we're going to have to pretty much work with kind of the local lenders and kind of get, I suppose, our funding sources on their radar, so that when and if a project comes across their table that is applicable to this, they'd be able to, of course, come to us and help with the application and whatnot. But that's, I guess I'm just thinking out loud. Does that sound accurate, that we'd pretty much have to just kind of work hand in hand with all the lenders in town?
Well, on these smaller, on the down payment assistance and homeowner rehab loans, you would have an organization in between that, and they would be kind of responsible for getting the word out to both homeowners, home buyers, and to the lending or in real estate community, and through a variety of means, like the home buyer ed class and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that people would know, and they're advertised, they got websites, they go to housing conferences, and for people in the business, they would know about it. And then it would just be, these end up being, one by one, making a difference for folks. And the reality is, on the homeowner side, the majority of affordable home ownership, either first-time home buyers or preservation like rehab, is done through these small through these individual assistance loans or that occur, rather than, there isn't a lot of examples of, I think there's probably, I can only think of maybe 2, say, affordable home developments that were ever built through kind of affordable housing, funding through affordable housing in the whole state of Montana. While there's been, thousands of home buyer assistance loans that have been done over the years to get people in the, as you said, Riley, you were able to, you were able to take advantage of that, and lots of people have. That's how they got into their first home in the first place. It's really just become really challenging in our Helena market, and so any additional tools we can throw on the table, I think, is to our advantage, because we can use the statewide money that's there and pile on different pieces of it. You sometimes, on a first-time home buyer deal, you might sometimes have 3 or 4 funding sources, much in the same way in our multifamily rentals that we're talking about developing, as part of using these funds. The days where you might have 1 or 2 funding sources is not very common. It's usually 3, 4, 5 funding sources, and they refer to it as the funding stack because it puts so many pieces together. It's not getting easier.
No.
Any additional thoughts or other activities that you're familiar with? I'm trying to think of things that might not be taken care of. So again, this would be similar to the purchase of land. I think generally you're trying to put your whole project together and it all flows as one single kind of financing package, but it doesn't always work that way. And one of the areas can be demolition. I'm trying to think if we're allowing for that. Certainly we're allowing for demolition as part of the project. Again, Mr. John, how are you? Good to see you.
Embarrassed.
Sorry.
I'm sure that I have a appointment or a scheduled Zoom meeting on Friday, which is not true, but
You do.
Well, I have the Friday one too, but I also have this one. I'm like, I don't know. Well, anyway, I screwed that up. So my apologies.
So
sorry, I missed so much of the
we'd
meeting.
love to have your input here. So we were focusing on what I think is really the heart of the matter in terms of these guidelines. And that is, at this stage of the game, what activities do we want to, kind of the discussion point is, do we want to include a broader array of eligible activities and be clear that they're eligible, and using common tools that are frequently areas that you'll see as an effective way of addressing affordable, housing in the state. So 3 we just talked about was as written in the guidelines, we aren't allowing for first-time home buyer down payment assistance through the trust fund, and whether or not we should allow that. And again, we want to be clear, we're not talking about the city administering, it'd be through a third party. And John, you probably been involved in first-time home buyer deals and in your career. And so what the thinking is, much like these funds will be used to extend the affordable housing power, in a rental development, that this would be added to and considered kind of the last funds in to, on a down payment assistance using other available funds to buy down the purchase price. But whether or not we want to allow that is not to say that we even have, anyone would come forward, an organization would put a proposal together, do it, but should we at this stage allow for it? And the thinking is that it's easier to have a wide, recommend a whole variety of not home buyer, but affordable housing activities that are commonly used in the field at this stage in these guidelines, rather than thinking that we'll come back later and add them. And my experience is that you rarely ever come back and add things into once established, that it's better to establish it broadly and just see how it's used. But thoughts on down payment assistance?
Well, I think the more tools you put in your toolbox at the beginning, the easier it's going to be to accomplish, the mission. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea to put this on the docket. Absolutely.
Good. Okay. Then the homeowner rehab, again, in a similar fashion, would just be extending, would be an add-on to seeking other funds. Currently, the city has a CDBG funded homeowner rehab program in partnership with Habitat and NeighborWorks Montana, and this would be, could potentially be used for in conjunction with that program, or for folks that may not otherwise qualify. Again, no idea what there's no specific proposal, just do we want to encourage it as a way of preserving home ownership, particularly in the areas of life and safety improvements for homeowners at this stage. Yeah. And then the third one was the broad category of manufactured housing, but we talked a little bit about common preservation strategies we're seeing, where a lot of communities have seen manufactured housing communities get bought out, and with relatively short notice, the residents are displaced, often losing their home as well because they can't really move manufactured home. And so one strategy that we've seen to become fairly common is resident-owned communities, where they form kind of a co-op or a nonprofit, and they buy their finance to buy the park themselves. They continue to own their own home, but that they own the park and the infrastructure collaboratively. And it's a national movement, and we have seen quite a bit of success in Montana. Resident-owned communities if you Google resident-owned community or ROC, you can see examples of that. But other manufactured housing preservation, I could see where, you could even have a private owner of a community wanting to come in and want to borrow money or something to meet a need, and that there would be a deed restriction, or there would be a low interest loan paid back, and that in order to continue to offer that. If you think, John, as you cruise around, you can think of the manufactured housing communities we have within the city limits, and that some of them are sitting on relatively valuable pieces of ground that someone, particularly with land prices going up, they'd come in and go, oh, I can pick this up pretty cheaply, displace this, and I can turn this into some other. It's usually, usually not turned into affordable housing. It's usually turned into some other purpose. So, but it's, we haven't had that kind of gun to our head kind of thing in Helena yet, but there's been a lot of it in Missoula's and Bozeman, Kalispell, and Billings. And so, again, manufactured housing being a choice that a lot of people make in terms of being able to have an affordable home that's theirs that they feel they have autonomy over. And sometimes they own the land under it, and sometimes it's in a park, in a community. I don't know, any thoughts on any of those?
Well, a couple of things, and I guess apologies again if I'm, repeating something someone's already said. I'm sorry I'm so late to this meeting, but with regard to the third point, the manufactured housing, there's virtually no way to change our ability to help any set of manufactured home owners without having it on the books already. Right now, we don't face any of that, but as you mentioned, Michael, there's quite a few of varying sizes within the city limits, especially of these medium and small manufactured home parks that very well could happen to, some of which actually, it's a different conversation, but there are some of them that are in locations that probably would be better suited for other uses if you're looking at it on a broader city planning kind of scale. But people do still live there, and so being able to figure out if something like that were to happen to somebody, is there also money available that would help relocating trailers or moving manufactured homes to more appropriate places? And I don't know the answer to that one, but that might be a bigger can of worms. Homeowner rehab loans. The only thing that I'll say about that is that as a realtor, you can see how quickly everything price point wise is moving north. And what used to be a lot of housing that would have just sort of felt like middle of the road homes, people aren't going to be able to afford to live in them if they do encounter those significant repair jobs. Everything is a lot more expensive now than it ever used to be. So that's absolutely a good reason to have the money on the books. But again, I'm glad to see that you anticipate it be administered by a third party, because I don't think there's anybody available to actually take that onto their plate right now. Does that all make sense?
And as for first-time homebuyer down payment assistance, is that?
Well, I was actually referencing your second bullet point, the homeowner rehab loans. Also.
All righty. Perhaps so let's, for our next meeting, let's look really closely at the eligible uses, and maybe, folks can do their own, thinking and checking around in terms of strategies that are common, and see if that we're recommending the fullest array of tools that we think make sense for this community. And again, for any of these activities to happen, you would have to have, a community organization or entity to come forward to kind of lead the way and put together a proposal that first would come through this board and for review, but then ultimately would go to the city commission and would not. So it would have to make sense in terms of our overall goals for these funds, but that whether or not we want to make sure that we're making clear that a variety of common affordable housing tools are available so that we can have an effective strategies, maximum palette of choices in terms of approaching these issues and not knowing which, these things come together a little bit sometimes through strategy and sometimes they come through from opportunity and sometimes they come through crisis. It's kind of activity. And so, but if you don't include them in as eligible activities, you would have a whole other process that would have to occur at a later date to add things in. And again, my experience is rarely do you see things get added back in once they're not included at the beginning. I think it's always best to leave as many options available at the beginning and let the creativity of those who do this work to come into play. So maybe that's kind of just, we could just have a quick review of eligible activities and see if we come to a final conclusion at our next meeting in terms of recommendation. The other thing to look at is that currently everything we're proposing is using these kind of standard, usually affordable housing world. Maximum income is 80% of median and below, and different activities will have kind of restrictions on them. Rentals using various affordable housing resources like tax credits or home program or things. We usually kind of limited at 60%, and they're kind of changing some things that it can be an income averaging to get at that 60%. But right now, the way we're written, everything's at 80%, which seems reasonable, but I could see people making an argument for whether or not we want to, these are a limited amount of funds, and whether or not we want to open, we're not restricted like we are with, say, federal dollars or things to just below 80%, but that we're in agreement that we want to keep that eligibility at that standard 80% for a couple of reasons. One is that way you can leverage those other dollars that might be available to fund that activity and allowing these funds to come in last. The other argument is, and I certainly hear it in the community, is that say on home ownership, there's people that with higher incomes that can't afford a home, and you'll see some affordable home ownership programs through loan programs and things do things, say up as high as like 125% of median income. But again, these are limited funds, and so something to think about, and whether or not, but just so that everyone's on board and we make the recommendation. I think that really gets to the heart of the matter is what activities we're doing and at what income levels are we going to be focused. And so again, we can talk about that at the next meeting and kind of be firm in those recommendations. And so go from there. Any questions in terms of process?
I think that Kara mentioned, oh, damn it, that there was, and I think you did too, Michael, the city is undertaking another program, a separate program for homeowner rehab loans.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
well, those are more grants, but yeah, there's a homeowner rehab. And so that all these activities that we're talking about have other funding sources. And so again, the city funds would be an extension of those other funding sources. And so it's not a duplication or to replace what's already there. It's either would be to provide funds to provide a little more where, depending on the guidelines of the other program, whether that we need other funds or for whatever reason where there would be a need that wouldn't be otherwise funded. I'm not sure what the income eligibility for the CDBG program rehab is. Is that 80% or 60%?
It's set at 80%.
Is it set? But there may be a reason to have, again, it's the having the tool chest and whether we need it right away or if at some point we're no longer doing a CDBG home buyer program. We might, just be there, but it's homeowner rehab is a pretty standard activity that you want to finance because it allows people to stay in their homes and take care of, as we discussed, health and safety issues.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So for next go round, Kara, I think we've covered these things. We kind of review what our recommendations would be for eligible activities, affirm the focus on income eligibility, and then how would you like us to proceed from there? Do we want to just review the process? If people would read through that section of the guidelines, and people might then also look at the application and see if any part of it is anything that we want. Do you want to just finish the review of the guidelines and then move into application as a separate item, or what you're thinking, Kara?
Yeah, I think that could be a good way to go about it. I know, just for transparency's sake, we are meeting with Andrew Shanania, the consultant who has put all of this together. And I don't know, I don't want to guarantee that he might have edits. I guess last time we met, I was really thinking that we might be able to have edits to look at this afternoon. So being that the timeline is kind of getting pushed out here a little bit, I don't necessarily want to guarantee that there might be something like that to look at our April meeting. But I guess maybe that's a good idea, Michael. Maybe just really focus on these guidelines and then maybe take on the application in depth once we've really gotten through that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that would be a good goal that if my sense is that folks would generally like to see more of eligible activities that, again, not making things up, but things that are commonly used, like these items we discussed today. And maybe Andrew can take a run at having some language, how we'd incorporate in the guidelines, then we can sign off on that, on not only eligible activities, but move on signing off on a recommendation on the whole guidelines moving forward, then move into the final application review.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry, Michael.
Okay.
I just wanted to say too, I'll more of a reminder to myself, but I'll go ahead and send out a PDF of the trust fund resolution, just so you guys have an idea how it all got started and what the kind of framework we're working off of is. So I apologize for not doing that sooner, but I'll go ahead and do that after this meeting.
Hey, did anybody get a chance to participate in the public board training that was provided last week? Or did you? It's a good training. I've taken it a couple times. I think it's very useful. So it comes around periodically. So we'll be sure to get that out to folks. But
And it sounds like you can look at it online, right?
oh yeah, absolutely. It is available. Kara, could you send that around to everybody, and maybe people's free time if their Netflix is not as exciting, that they might put it on for the whole family over the weekend, kind of.
Yeah, I have a link to one of the sessions you can look at on YouTube, and then I can also send out the PDFs of the packets that they're referencing during the meeting too.
It is very useful in terms of we have great public meeting laws in the state of Montana. I think we have, which encourage participatory citizenship. So I think it's a great thing, and they do it. It's this training put on by I think it's called Civic Governance Center at the MSU. It's good folks. do this all over the state. And then any additional questions for today from anyone? This is a public meeting, so we're going to invite public comment at this time. I don't know if there's anyone from the public on today. Not hearing any, we'll move on. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 6th. At the same time, 2 o'clock. And just wanted to get kind of a initial sense from the board members as to some discussion of beginning to offer a hybrid version of the meeting where some people can meet in person, some would maintain the ability to participate remotely. And we're kind of an in-between, not quite sure. We're assuming things are moving in a very positive direction, but we're still in Montana's about a month behind the rest of the country, 3 weeks behind. But you can kind of do that in terms of the pandemic, that you can do the math in terms of things seem to be dropping in half week by week. It went up, it had that exponential growth on the way up, and it's kind of having that same trajectory on the way down. And whether or not by April 6th that people would want to meet in person. And there's also, I think hybrid meetings probably have a life that post-pandemic, and that there are some advantages that we don't have to run all over town, and we can all join in. But any thoughts on how not everyone had, there was just a request to whether we meet in person at some point. Any thoughts on when we would want to think about that?
And just to add to that too, as far as, I know the one request we had was kind of due to some technology issues, and we're always happy if you ever need, we can set you up in a conference room here, or make sure that there is a space available. But that's kind of, I guess, aside from the conversation as far as hybrid versus in-person or completely virtual. And I think right now too, I guess all of our boards are completely virtual, and our city commission just went to officially a hybrid model from here on out, or for the foreseeable future. But yeah, certainly like Michael said, looking like it's going in that direction.
For right now, with not hearing any movement, opposite, should we maintain the status quo, continue to meet virtually, and then anyone who needs help with accessing it could join through could go down the city and use their technology to participate, and then we'll revisit that in April.
Sounds good.
That makes a lot of sense to me too. I just got done with the zoning advisory panel work for the county, which over the last year was a mixed bag of in-person, virtual, and hybrid meetings. I will say that the hybrid version is the most awkward. It's hard to serve both worlds adequately at the same time. So there was certainly a learning curve there, but Greg McNally at the county did a pretty good job of getting us trained up, if you will, to be able to accommodate that. And that might be, if that's the way that we go, we don't have to reinvent it. That's for sure.
For now, we'll be virtual on April 6th, and we'll revisit as we go and listen to what the board would like to do. Right now I can see everybody. That's kind of nice. I don't know. I do miss in-person meetings at some point. I hope it's not an issue. It's like, it's that breakup, having a chance to, being on a board with somebody is kind of a special experience where, you can, it's a time in between the meeting that you sometimes get to know people and get to share ideas. But this works for now, and we'll just go forward. But we'll see everyone on the 6th. And then just so the board knows that John and I are meeting. So we'll meeting with Kara and Andrew Shania just to carry forward some of this in a meeting with him. And then we'll bring whatever comes of that back to the board. Okay.
Sounds good.
That's Friday and I'll be ready.
You'll be ready. I know you are, John. You wanted a good entrance today. You wanted a. You
Yeah,
believe in
I
it.
do a lot of theater and so drama is, I'm all about the drama, I guess. I'm sorry. Kara, thanks for the email. I never would have got here without it. That's for sure.
No
So,
problem. Always happy to do that.
No, I'm the same way. If it doesn't get on my calendar for some reason, I always appreciate the ping so I can kind of run around and get in. So, all right, everyone. Well, take good care. Enjoy this last little bit of spring before the snows return on Friday. But do a little yard work for a day or two and get it. Hopefully winter's not over or we'll all regret it. But take care, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
thanks all.